Hi, this is A Skeptical Consult with Dr. Stephen Novella. And on this episode, I'm going to talk about all the hubbub surrounding hydroxychloroquine and COVID-19. Now, hydroxychloroquine and a similar drug called chloroquine and also an antibiotic called azithromycin have been touted, some would say hyped, as a potential treatment for the current COVID-19 pandemic or SARS-CoV-2 virus. What is this based on? Are these claims credible? Is the hype worth it? Well, I'll cut to the chase and tell you not so much, but let's go through the details. So yes, there actually is some antiviral activity for drugs like hydroxychloroquine. This is based upon what we call in vitro data. In vitro literally means in glass, and this means that these are studies in like petri dishes, right? Not in actual living organisms or people. This antiviral activity is nonspecific, meaning it's not specific to SARS-CoV-2 or even to coronaviruses as a group. It does have some broad antiviral activity. The drug also has immunosuppressive activity. That could either be a good thing or a bad thing, right? If you're fighting off an infection, you don't want to suppress your immune system, but the immune activity against an infection can sometimes cause part of the damage. And the thinking is that hydroxychloroquine may reduce the cytokine storm that can occur in late phase, very sick people with COVID-19. And this could therefore reduce some of that damage caused by the overwhelming immune activity that's resulting from trying to fight off this viral infection. So what does that mean? That means, okay, it's plausible. There's a plausible mechanism of action here, and we need to study it in clinical trials in order to know if it actually works. It's important to emphasize at this point that if we look at all potential drugs that have some promising activity in vitro, only a very tiny slice of them actually end up being used in patients. Most drugs do not pan out. They do not survive the long clinical trials required in order to show that they're safe and that they're effective in a way that can be given to people in safe doses. Now, hydroxychloroquine is an already approved drug. It is an anti-malarial drug. So it's sort of part of the way there. We already know that it can have pharmacological activity in safe doses, at least as an anti-malarial drug. So that makes it a little bit more likely than a brand new drug that hasn't already gone through human testing. But still, the idea that it'll be clinically useful against COVID-19 is still a stretch based upon this very preliminary in vitro data. We do have also some early, very preliminary clinical data. Let's go through that. So the hype was really kicked off by a French study by Gautret et al., where they looked at hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin, both together and separately, with a small number of patients who had COVID-19, and they were looking just to see if the virus was cleared from a nasal swab using PCR, the polymerase chain reaction that greatly amplifies the DNA or the RNA of an organism so you can detect a very small amount of it. Now, this was a small study. It was also not randomized. Patients were not randomized to whether they got hydroxychloroquine or with or without azithromycin or just usual care. That's a problem for studies like this because it means that there's confounding factors can find their way in. But even on top of that, the fact that it's a small study that's not randomized, the methodology was actually quite terrible, and it has been soundly criticized. In fact, the organization that publishes the journal, that produces the journal that published this study, came out with a statement saying that this study does not adhere to the usual standards that this society stands for. That was, kind of a politically soft way of saying this study was crap, and we probably wouldn't have published it. Probably the biggest specific thing that's a problem with the study is the fact that they did not do what we call an intention to treat analysis, meaning that everybody who gets randomized or gets included into a study, we count that data, even no matter what happened with them, whether they got the treatment or they didn't get the treatment. So for example, in this study, some of the patients who were treated were not included in the final analysis because they got too sick. They were transferred to the ICU, for example. So if you're allowing the sick patients to be eliminated from the study and not included in the final data, that's a massive bias towards the ultimate results. The bottom line with this study, even though it has sparked a tremendous amount of hype around the world, this is a terrible study that really is uninterpretable. We can't really make any firm conclusions about whether or not either of these two drugs is effective for COVID-19 just based upon this data. But there have been two subsequent studies. First, Molina et al., also French researchers, decided to see if they could just replicate those results, and they could not. This was also a small study. They looked at 11 patients, but they found that there was no effect from hydroxychloroquine with either the elimination of the virus or altering the clinical course in those 11 patients that were studied. Again, this doesn't prove it doesn't work. This is just trying to replicate the original study. They couldn't, and that casts even further doubt on those original results. Now, we also have the first randomized clinical trial. This is a slightly better study of hydroxychloroquine and COVID-19. This one's coming out of China from Song et al., and they found no benefit from treatment at all. Again, these are preliminary clinical findings. Essentially, we have 3 studies at this point, one with terrible methodology, one with slightly better methodology, and then a third, at least randomized clinical trial. And those second 2 show no benefit, no effect. So we have mixed results at best from this preliminary data. So what are the experts saying who were looking at all of this, reviewing it, trying to put it all together? They're saying, well, we can't draw any conclusions. We can't know if it works or it doesn't work, but there certainly isn't a home run here, right? There isn't such a dramatic effect that we're seeing it in these small preliminary studies. We're not really seeing any effect in these, at least those latter 2 studies. So the probability that there is a clinically relevant treatment effect, at least from hydroxychloroquine, is getting smaller. It's pretty small. But there's still, because this is a new pandemic and we don't have effective treatment for it, and we may be a year out from a vaccine, researchers are going to try to fast track some more rigorous, larger clinical trials. So we do need, that's the one thing everybody agrees on, we need large clinical trials so that we can definitively say whether or not any of these drug combinations are effective against COVID-19. But at this point, there isn't a justification for really treating patients with this outside of a clinical trial, which is what Dr. Fauci has said. He would take it only in the context of a clinical trial, and I completely agree with that assessment. People certainly shouldn't be treating themselves for it with any of these drug combinations. It also has to be pointed out that these drugs are not entirely benign. Hydroxychloroquine, for example, can have serious, although uncommon, side effects. For example, it can prolong the QT interval in the heart rhythm, which is essentially sort of the pause between beats, if you will. And that is a known dangerous arrhythmia. If that happens too much, it can cause heart failure, dangerous heart arrhythmias. And so this shouldn't be taken without proper clinical supervision. Essentially, your doctor should prescribe this to you, and they should monitor you if you're on this drug. The probability of harm here is significant. In fact, in the French trial from Molina et al., they had to eliminate 2 patients from the trial because of side effects from the drug. So you can't take a what's the harm approach here, because these are serious drugs with serious side effects. We need to know at a dose necessary to have a clinically relevant effect, specifically on COVID-19, is that dose safe, and does it cause more benefit than harm? Only really rigorous clinical trials will answer that question for us. If you like this content and you want more similar content, you can take a look at one of my 2 blogs, Neurologica, which is my personal blog, and Science-Based Medicine, which is a group blog I write with other skeptical physicians. And also you can check out The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, which is both a podcast and a book by my co-hosts and myself. And if you're not already familiar with it, do check it out. And don't forget to like this video. I'm hoping to produce more of them. And of course, the more social media love I get, the better. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.